Most AI coding tools feel exactly the same, until you try using them on real code bases. I've tested Cursor, Copilot, and dozens of others, but they all break down once your repo starts to get complicated. That's why I was genuinely surprised when I tried Augment Code, because this one's actually built for messy, real-world code. I even used it for an open source project that's kind of like Calendly to create new features, fix bugs, fix tests, and even debug through any complex issues. And honestly, I genuinely fell in love with this product, which is why I'm talking about it today. And I wanted to actually test the waters and compare it to another tool that I've been using, Cursor. So let's see which one comes out on top. The setup for Augment and Cursor were both pretty easy, but Augment is actually more intuitive because it's just an extension that you can use in VS Code. Whereas with Cursor, it's a standalone AI-powered IDE, so you kind of have to learn the ropes all over again. Whereas with VS Code, I already know how to use it, so the extension makes it really convenient for me to just get started with coding right away. So that being said, in this video, we're mostly going to be working with an open source code base to compare the tools. This is cal.com. It's a Calendly alternative. So let's take a look at how it works. This is the repo that we're going to be working with in all of our demos for today's video. It's called cal.com, and it's basically like Calendly. So if you look at their About the Project section, it kind of just shows that you can look at your calendar or your schedule and then actually just schedule meetings with other people. Very similar to Calendly. And so it's completely open source. Looks like they've had some recognition in Hacker News. And then they have a ton of documentation, how to get started, all of that stuff, which we're hoping that Augment is able to get through this README and understand what exactly is going on and get us started with running this application on our own. So yep, this is the application that we will be using. Okay, so we want to get through a couple of important tasks with both tools. The first being setting up our environment to actually run the code. Okay, so let's go through the setup of Augment as an extension on Visual Studio Code. So it's pretty easy to just install it. You can go ahead and go to their website and search for it. And then once it's installed as an extension, you want to actually allow it to index your code base. And what that does is it actually understands your repository once you index it, because it's going through all of the files within that repository, and it also is given the permissions to look at everything. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. And so now I want to know, how do I run this application? And it'll go ahead and actually figure out all of the dependencies that it needs to install, what CLI commands I need to actually run the application. It even has its own Augment terminal that it'll run processes on, and it'll sometimes open up multiple terminals for you and show you all these processes, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it's just going through the motions of installing Yarn, because we're going to use Yarn to mostly go through this project. It'll go through the actual README to understand the steps it needs to go through. And using a click of the button, you can literally just have it run these CLI commands in the Augment terminal, which is great. Cool. And then at the end, it has installed everything. It's running the application, and we're able to see the result. It's pretty quick, very easy to do. Not a lot of work on my part as a developer. So let's try with Cursor. Can we run the app and pull all dependencies? Okay, so it's going through the instructions. Let's try to run this. So right off the bat, I can say that it's kind of similar to Augment, but readability and usability, it's very different. I would say that Augment actually really paid attention to the UX. And so I felt the experience using Augment has already been really easy. The way that the chat for Cursor is set up, it gets a little bit confusing as to like what's going on. Again, no functional issues, just maybe preferability. Okay, and then another thing I actually liked in Augment better, it isn't really telling me what the CLI commands are doing. It's just giving me CLI commands to run, whereas with Augment, it was telling me what those commands were. And so this Cursor is kind of keeping me in the dark. Yeah, and it's taking a while too. Doesn't really look like it's working. And it keeps now repeating the same command. Oh, that's so interesting. It's not really figuring things out on its own, whereas Augment, it actually works like an agent. When something didn't work, it then pivoted and then tried to proactively find the solution. It looks like we've run the same CLI command 4 times. So clearly Cursor doesn't know what it's doing right now. So I have to probably prompt it, is what I'm guessing. Like, I'll say this command isn't working. Okay, so finally I had to prompt it a couple times. Now it's saying that we should start by installing Yarn. It took a while to get there, but we got there. When we were using Augment earlier, it actually installed a lot of the dependencies that we needed. Cursor actually has an easier job to do because a lot of the things it's going to check for have already been installed. So we're not really able to uninstall everything, but it seems like it's already having some trouble. So we're just going to let it. Okay, so now it's trying to create a database for cal.com and it failed. So let's try connecting to the current user That's what it asks us to do. Okay, so it's able to do that, and they've checked, which is fine because there is a Callenso database that exists. So let's go ahead and run that. So for all intents and purposes, we're not going to go through the whole setup with Cursor until the very end. I'll do that on my own and then give the end piece. Okay, so we were able to set everything up with Cursor. The biggest difference, like the setup parts were both pretty easy for Augment and Cursor, but the biggest thing I'll say with Cursor is you have to be a lot more active in prompting it for certain things because it'll continue to rerun several of the same CLI commands, even though it's not really doing anything. So it's kind of, it ends up spinning on the same command. Whereas with Augment, it started to try a lot of different things. When one thing didn't work, it tried another thing. When that thing didn't work, it tried yet another thing. And so I do feel like it's a lot more autonomous to use Augment. And this is just for the setup, you guys. So let's go ahead and move on to the next section. Cursor is still having an issue running the app. It tried to run yarn dev just so we could start the server. It didn't work. There was an error clearly saying that we need the next auth secret to be set. It says, I mentioned that, and it said, you're absolutely right. Let's just run the app with yarn and see what happens. The app might work with the default configuration or give us a specific message. But then I basically told it like, no, we have to set next auth secret, which I'm confused why it doesn't show my chat history here either. Oh yes, okay, so there are two in the queue. So maybe we stop this and then we send this one. We have to set next auth. It's kind of confusing, honestly. Yeah, I can see the app is trying to start, but it needs to set this. So in the README, basically, we're going to generate a random base 64. Yeah, so a lot of hand holding. Okay, also ton of information. Confirm that I want to proceed. Let's see if it runs yarn dev again. Okay, so it doesn't have permission to edit the .env file directly due to workspace restrictions. So now it's telling me what to do. So I have to do a lot of manual steps. You can already see that Cursor is giving me a ton of issues. It's not doing things on its own. It's just giving me instructions to manually add to the repo, which suggests that it's more like an LLM rather than an actual agent. I'm going to go ahead and manually set things up. A little disappointed with Cursor. You can see there's like a stark difference between that and Augment. So let's get into actually writing and updating tests. In most real-life projects, the test files aren't always well documented or consistent. So figuring out how to add new tests can be tricky. We're going to use Augment to actually help us figure out the test file structure and then figure out how to add any tests, fix tests that don't work. So Augment helps by first giving you an overview of the existing test structure. You can ask it something like, show me the layout of these tests. It'll explain where the tests live, how they're organized, and what frameworks or libraries that they use. So let's get into a demo of how to actually go through this process step by step. Figuring out the testing structure, running the tests and making sure they work, fixing any issues if they don't work, and adding new tests. So I'm going to start out by asking it to tell me more about the test file structure in this project. So it's going ahead and reading through all of the directories, and the cool thing is it's actually showing you exactly what it's reading so that you can go navigate to that test folder as well. So after indexing your repo with Augment code, it's really cool because it actually does the work in trying to understand what the testing framework looks like as a whole. So now I want to ask it, how do we add a new unit test for scheduling? Where can I do something like that? Yeah, so it's given me a bunch of options, but it suggested using our tests in the apps lib folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and navigate to that file. And there it is. It's actually highlighted it for us, so it's really easy to navigate to as well. It's the Your Scheduling feature test. Okay, so we just want to add a basic test just to make sure that the scheduling is working correctly. And it generated a test for you. So let's go through it. It's created a working hours constant with a start and an end variable. Basically, it shows that we're working from 9 to 5, and that's when we have openings to scheduled meetings. And then it creates a weekly schedule array, and it inserts those working hours into each day, Monday through Friday. Then it creates test date ranges for the slot generation. And then also it generates availability and time slots in our assertions. Then it generates availability and time slots in our act section. So you can see that it's added a business day with date ranges. We're also using get availability from schedule and setting that equal to our availability variable. And the get availability from schedule and the get slot are just imports that we're using from a library. And so those are defined elsewhere in the repo. Yeah, so if we go down to the assertion, you can see that we're going to expect the time slots to have length of 8. We're going to have certain expectations. And so you can pause here and look at all of our assertions. But now we want to run this test. We want to make sure, does it actually work? Okay, so how do we run this test? That's what I'm going to ask Augment AI. So, and it gives us our exact command lines that we need for the Augment terminal. And there we go. So we ran the tests and it looks like everything has passed. And now you can add more updates as well. So for example, I asked it, let's create an update where we schedule something on a Monday and then verify that something has actually been scheduled. And so you can see that it creates a whole new test for that. So unit tests aren't the only things that you put in your repository, as you know. We also want to get an idea of what the integration tests look like. And we also want to add an integration test as well. So Augment is kind of doing its thing again, where it's outputting and indexing all of these files to understand, okay, what integration tests exist and what else can we add. But before we do that, we also want to run the integration tests and make sure that they're in a working state. And so it did run the integration tests and it saw that one passed and one failed. So there is something wrong and we have to actually fix that. But the cool thing is that Augment is already being proactive and it's trying to proactively fix it on its own. Yep, so it figured out the issue. The handle new booking function expects an object with booking data property, but it was passing the rec object directly. So it even goes through its debugging points to understand what's going on. And we're actually going to go into a more comprehensive debugging section later on in this video. Okay, so it's gone through a bunch of fixes and eventually it does figure out what the issue is. And so there you can see that all of our tests have passed. So then you can go ahead and just add tests from there now that everything's in a working state. So pretty cool if you ask me. I barely had to touch my keyboard and it went ahead and added a unit test, actually 2 unit tests, and it fixed the errors in the integration tests, which gave me a clean slate to start creating integration tests. So now we're using Cursor to try to add a test as well. Okay, cool. So it's trying to add a test and it did notice that there were some formatting issues. So let's see if it can fix the entire file. So it looks like everything is good. Let's delete the file and recreate it. I don't know if that's the best idea, but let's go ahead and accept it. Let's just assume that it's doing the right thing. But when it's deleting a file, that makes me question what's going on. It looks like it's found syntax errors. Again, UX-wise, sometimes a little bit hard to read and understand what's happening, but it's trying to fix the issue. So let's just go with that. Okay, so it looks like we can now run our test. So let's run yarn test. Let's ask it to run it in the terminal for us. Looks like there's a few deprecation warnings. Yeah, it would be nice if it was actually sequentially printing out what exactly was happening. It almost looks like it's stuck. Yeah, so you can see that it's actually running all of the tests, apparently. And we have 24 that failed, 27 that failed, 283 that passed, and 2,210 that passed in our tests and test files. So let's just run the test that it created. So the test run completed the test for ensure array, which was the file that they deleted and then recreated, that failed. And it's because of an import issue. And so let's try to ask it to fix that. Yes, can you fix that? But see, again, like the fact that it has to keep asking us to fix it, it means you have to be pretty actively involved, which is okay. Sometimes asking permission is fine. But what I noticed with Augment is it kind of just debugs and fixes it, which I really like that. Okay, great. So the test passed. Your unit test for ensure array ran successfully and all 11 test cases passed. So that's great. It was able to create the test and run it. To be honest, it was a little confusing as to what it was doing and what was happening. So I would like a little bit more clarity next time. I noticed with Augment, it was very clear with all of the steps, what files it was indexing, where it was adding information, and it did not delete any files. So after that, we get into debugging complex issues. Most developers don't just fix typos or syntax errors. They debug problems that span multiple files or services. Augment is particularly strong here because it enables end-to-end debugging across an entire code base. So for example, let's say you encounter a real issue in cal.com. When users schedule or reschedule events, the time zone isn't updating properly. Some users are seeing their bookings show up in UTC, while others get the wrong local time, even though they've selected their time zone correctly. So let's take a look at a demo and see how Augment actually fixes this issue. Okay, so it figured out the problem. It's saying that there are 2 separate time zone statuses that need to be synchronized. So there's a time preferences store, the user's preferred time zone, and that's stored in local storage. And then there's the booker store.time zone, and this is the current booking session time zone. Now it's finding that there's an issue in our event meta class, and it found the exact line, and it's actually going to show us the code that's wrong, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so basically we're not converting to the correct booker's time zone. It just keeps it in UTC time zone. And so it kind of goes through our expected flow, but then what's actually happening, the flow with the bug. So it's explaining it kind of in layman's terms so we understand what's going on and we're not just letting it fix it without understanding what's being fixed. So the problem is that the bug introduced means that the available times component ignores the time zone completely when displaying times. So this can get kind of complicated because it has to parse through several files to understand using natural language what is going wrong and in the code how to actually fix this bug. So it's spanning multiple files to do this. So now I'm asking it, how do we actually fix this change? So now it's gone ahead and actually added the conversion from UTC. Before that wasn't there. So it added that .tz and it's passing in the time zone as a function call. So now let's go ahead and refresh the page and test out to see that the time zones are actually switching around. So now we're going to display it in Chicago and it looks like the times have switched. Let's look at a different date and then maybe we'll switch the time zone again just to double check. So we'll go to Denver. So it should be, yep, an hour before that. So instead of 3:45, it starts at 2:45. So it looks like our time zone is finally working. So Augment was able to assess the problem, figure out a fix, actually go ahead and fix it for us. And now we're visually seeing that this is working. So it's pretty cool. It's not a very easy task for an agent to do. A lot of times what I've noticed in my experience is when I work with other agents, it'll take a really long time to make a fix. And if it's even able to figure out what's going on, it'll usually stall and maybe give you some feedback on how to fix it yourself, but it will never go and just fix it on its own. I mean, I barely had to touch my keyboard. You probably saw my hands. So originally I wanted to show Cursor against Augment when it comes to debugging complex things, but I'm going to be honest, it's still debugging through even trying to run the app in the first place. It's still having issues. Our .env file is nowhere to be found, and it doesn't have permissions to actually add anything there. So not much to show in terms of debugging because it is still going through that process. So instead of manually grepping through hundreds of files, Augment maintains context between each of these components. It can explain how time zone data flows from the front end to the back end, how the back end stores and retrieves it, and where those inconsistencies might occur, like a missing conversion or a double conversion step causing the offset to be wrong. Cursor is great if you know exactly where the bug lives, but when you're debugging a cross-service issue like this, Augment gives you a huge advantage because it understands the whole system, not just the file they're in. And you could see that earlier with Cursor trying to just set up the application to run. It was really having a lot of trouble examining things cross-file or cross-application. So when it comes to adding new features in a large code base, Augment feels more like a partner than a tool. Say that I want to add smart scheduling so that when you go to schedule events with someone, it'll actually look at both of your calendars and help determine an optimized timing for both of you based on the type of schedule you have. So for example, if your Mondays are very booked, even if you have a time slot that's open, it'll take into consideration that maybe you want a break on Monday, and so try to schedule something for Tuesday. So let's take a look at just a small demo of how this could look like. So I want to add smart scheduling AI, where it gives optimal time suggestions based on my calendar and the person's calendar that I'm booking with. So it's going ahead and creating this core AI logic structure. So it says it's created a smart scheduling service TypeScript file, and then also a smart scheduling API TypeScript file. So it's going to go ahead and actually build out this entire feature for me. Ideally, what would happen is when you go to try to schedule an appointment with someone, that feature would pop up where it will guide you towards the timings based on both of your schedules. So again, it's not just going to look for openings, but based on how packed my schedule is or the types of meetings that I have on each day. Maybe I have lighter meetings on Mondays and Fridays. And so the more heavy meetings or more intense quantifiable types of meetings, those would be, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever the reason is, that's kind of what I want to do. But I'm going to direct it to actually just doing a demo for our own demo's sake, just so we don't get into too long of a process here where we're creating like a whole new feature that could take a really long time. We're going to do a small smaller feature that just shows a demo of what this would look like. So let's create a React component for the Smart Scheduling UI as well. Okay, so it's actually gone ahead and tried to create tests as well, which is pretty cool. But now one of the tests is failing. So of course it wants to fix that test. So now it's going to take some time to go ahead and like run through scenarios and fix the failing test. Okay, so it says it's ready to be used. Let's try to see if it works. And it's not working, but the tests are now passing. So it fixed the tests. Okay, so it's gone ahead and listed everything that it's created: an interactive demo page, AI-powered time suggestions, calendar integration, TRPC API backend, comprehensive tasks, cal.com design system integration, dialogue and tooltip components, icon system integration. It's added a ton of stuff, including into the UI. And it was actually showing me all the files that it was creating and editing before. And now it's also debugging through the issues. We're kind of pulling everything together that we worked on before. It's debugging, it's fixing tasks, it's actually looking at the entire context and trying to make it visually appealing. Okay, so this is the first iteration of our Smart Scheduling AI. So you can set up your meeting, you have an AI analysis, perfect time found. Those are the 3 steps. So first we're setting up our meeting, and it looks like it's just defaulted to 60-minute meeting duration with 3 people. And I am the organizer, and we have just like 2 example people that we're going to be doing the meeting with. So let's try the Smart Scheduling AI. Let's click on that button, and it doesn't work. So let's go back and tell Augment that it wasn't working. So now it's trying to fix through the problem and see what's going on. So let's check to see if there's a page wrapper that provides it. And this is the part that I really like about Augment AI. It's actually going through all of the steps to fix the problem. It's not just fixing the problem and then it becomes a black box to me, right? I want to know exactly what it's doing, because maybe I will disagree with it and say, hey, let's not touch this file. Let's instead try to fix it here. Okay, so let's go ahead and try again. It also made the UI a little bit cooler. So we're using the Smart Scheduling AI. It has the same 3 steps that we were looking at earlier. The only one note I would make is that it's hard to read some of the letters like meeting duration and participants. Same thing here. I'm the organizer. We have the meeting duration. We're going to try the Smart Scheduling as well. And just looking at the bottom, you can see that it has multi-calendar, time preferences, AI scoring. All right, so we're going to go to the Smart Scheduler. And right now it doesn't have any Smart Scheduling suggestions found because we have dummy data. Like we're just using fake people to create this meeting with. But yeah, it actually opens up a pop-up where we can try different criteria, or we can kind of see what the Smart Scheduler AI is suggesting. So that's pretty cool. Of course, there's more work to be done for this feature. For something that able to get set up within a few minutes, it's very, very powerful. And there's a lot more that comes from Augment that I've been very surprised with. So this is its process for building out a feature. It's not immune to creating minor bugs, but it immediately finds them from my experience and fixes it for you. And it goes through the process of fixing that as well. And it also added tests. So I think that's pretty cool. I'm heavily impressed with this functionality. Augment can also understand architectural patterns and system design. Sometimes when you join a new codebase, especially one as big as cal.com, the hardest part isn't writing the code. It's understanding your system architecture. So here's something cool that you can do with Augment that most AI coding assistants don't really support. You can actually ask it about the architectural patterns of the repo that you're in. For example, you can prompt Augment with something like, can you explain the system architecture of cal.com? What design patterns does it use and how are the services organized? This level of explanation is a huge time saver, especially if you're onboarding to a large code base. It's like having a tech lead summarize everything that fits together without you having to manually dig through the code or look at docs to understand what's happening. Now, Cursor might help you inspect one file at a time or explain what a specific function does, but Augment gives you the 10,000-foot view of the system. That's a massive difference when you're trying to add new features or debug across multiple services. So after trying both tools side by side, here's my takeaway. If you're working in a simple repo, hacking on side projects, whatever, Cursor is great. It's fast, it's focused, and the UI feels familiar if you're used to VS Code. But if you're dealing with real production code, things get complicated fast. Multiple services, complex dependencies, weird bugs that span front end to back end. That's where most coding assistants just completely fall apart. Augment didn't. It actually kept up. It helped me debug cross-service issues, update tests, process, and even understand the system architecture of a huge code base like cal.com. It wasn't just copy-pasting code. It was like having a co-engineer that could reason about the system. Honestly, it did most of the work for me, and it didn't just auto-complete lines in a file. I probably won't be using Cursor anymore if I'm being quite honest. Augment AI just earned a permanent spot in my workflow, and I'm going to use it all the time. If you're an engineer tired of AI tools that feel like a glorified autocomplete, try Augment. It's built for the code that you actually write.